Most of us are uneasy about the feelings that can be present in our body. Feelings meaning emotions, but also feelings meaning sensations and energy. A crisis in the present moment can bring up memories of times in our past when we had a shock. It's common to feel powerless, to be angry, to have all kinds of emotional reactions when something shifts abruptly, especially when it's a change that we're not expecting or that is not welcome. In addition to images in the present moment, it can also bring back images and also the feeling in our body of times in the past. One of the ways that our brain sets us up for optimal chances of survival is that we make associations and we remember anything that's dangerous. Our brain has a negativity bias. It's only in our modern day society, when the threats are so consistently present and so intrusive, that this very healthy developmental survival method turns into a liability. Part of how that rolls out is the feelings and sensations in our body. When we have an abrupt shift, it brings back the feeling in our body and it makes us very uncomfortable. We can't really control a lot of what happens in our life. In a tragic accident, the shock, the disbelief, the fear or terror, and the immense grief or sadness of that brings us right back to how we felt when we were a child. We were dependent on other people who may or may not have been up to the task of keeping us safe. The other component of this is that we've just been really hit hard with the vulnerability of being human. Whether it's a loss of health due to a diagnosis, maybe somebody has died or been seriously hurt, we've lost our job, our partner's come home and said that the relationship's over. All of these feel like life threats to us. Something has really shifted. And now we can no longer pretend that everything is going to be the same ever again. It is not. Anger is one of the common emotions. It's healthy to acknowledge that we're feeling angry, especially when there's a justification for that. A mistake has been made, or somebody was careless and a life has been lost. It is completely appropriate to feel angry, and that might be a driving emotion for a long time to come. Something's happened that's not right, and we rail against that. We desperately want that to be different than what it is. The expression of anger, of course, is a different issue. We can be very destructive in our anger expression, or we can stuff it down and never feel it. That's also very harmful for our own body, for our own system, and for everybody around the person who's like a powder keg. We can all sense when somebody's ready to blow. Sometimes the purpose of anger, or one of the functions, is that it's preferable to feeling grief and it's preferable to feeling powerless. When we feel into anger and really allow it to be there, often sadness and grief are what is underneath. We need to give ourselves the opportunity to feel the full range of emotion: anger, grief, outrage, sadness, regret, guilt. Whatever it is that's coming up for us, we need to be able to feel all of it. We can't allow ourselves to feel the full range of emotion if we're not convinced that we're going to survive. It has to be felt and expressed in a way that allows us to feel like that's okay. We're going to make it through this, and we're actually going to feel better coming out the other side. A basic understanding of trauma and the fight, flight, freeze system can be helpful in situations when there's a crisis. Everyone is going to be as they are, except more extreme, especially in dysfunctional families where people have not yet been able to really tune in and to feel what's going on. There will be a lot of outward deflection, numbing, anxiety, fear, addiction might come into it. There can be a volatility that makes it very difficult. A lot of hurt can happen during those times. It triggers old patterns: judgment, impatience, frustration. Recognizing that this is not easy for anyone. When people lash out, it is a pain response, a trauma response. We can be practical about that and understanding, and at the same time, work with our own boundaries, work with healing ourselves, being kind with ourselves. Those are not mutually exclusive. Emotional flooding is an issue when we've just had a shock. Our system sends out a big gush of adrenaline, cortisol, a bunch of hormones and chemicals that will help us to deal with the emergency. It takes about 20 to 25 minutes actually for these to leave the system to work their way through. The reason it's important to be able to identify when we're starting to feel emotionally flooded or when a person that we're talking with is so that we can take that break of 20 or 25 minutes. We might have to say, right now, I'm feeling really flooded. I can't actually have a conversation with you about this right now. I'm going to go for a walk. I'll be back in 20 minutes and let's take it up again then. We need to do something to change the trajectory of what's happening in the body. And the best way to do that is something called mining. We can learn how to sit with the energy, the feelings, and sensation in our body. We can notice that there's space around them. A sensation doesn't fill up the whole universe, it happens in a location. It might have a sharp boundary, or it might be kind of diffuse. It just kind of drifts off. It's intense in the middle, but then at some point you can't feel it any longer. We can notice the space around a sensation, and we can mine the sensation for meaning. Why did this particular sensation show up? Why is it here? There's an attached practice on sitting with sensation that will allow you to go through this in a guided manner. Try it and see. Acknowledge that there's a reluctance to be present with strong sensation or energy in our body. When we're not able to be present with what's going on in our body, with the intensity of it or the pain of it, whatever the situation is, then we move into our coping mechanisms. It might be that we go numb. We might grab a drink or a cigarette. We might get into a fight with somebody. We could also use healthier expressions. We could go for a walk. We could admit that we're feeling overwhelmed. We could do a breathing practice or a relaxation. We could do some tapping or tracing on the intense images that might be in the mind or the words that we're hearing. There are many, many ways to work with this. And it all comes back to this: what is happening in my body? Can I welcome this? Can I allow it to be here? In the interest of knowing more about what's going on inside, could I actually turn towards this instead of turning away? That's what these practices about sitting with energy, feelings, and sensations. Try it for yourself. We need to talk about kindness and compassion. When something has just happened, particularly if there's an injustice embedded in it, it can be really difficult to come back to kindness and compassion for ourselves and for other people that are involved. The mind can be roaring with intrusive thoughts, with rage. It can feel impossible to actually come in and feel what's going on in the heart. So, do what practices you need to do. Get out for a walk, go swimming, do a yoga practice, call a friend, do all of those things that we need to do. Do the mining, sit with the sensation, do some Qigong, shake the energy out, and then at some point, come back to your heart. There's an attached practice called What Does the Heart Know? The basics of it are that we put our hand on our heart. We feel the warmth of our hand and the comfort of that. And we open up to knowing, how do we feel right now? Not how do we think, how do we believe, our thoughts about our experience. Right now, we're going right into the heart. What does the heart know that I might need to know? And what are the possibilities for kindness and compassion in the situation that you're in? Even when people are really screwing up, even when you've just had to deal with an outburst of rage, or maybe you're the one who's burst out with it, can you find compassion and kindness for yourself and for the other people? When we're hurting, that's often when the greatest hurt comes. In a sudden shock or a tragedy, everybody's floundering. And can you open up some space in your heart to hold yourself and everybody else with some softness, with some kindness, with compassion?